Hello Team Jessie James Beads, how are you doing today? Welcome to the Facebook Live for the 11th of November. I understand it's 11 AM Eastern Standard. Hi, I'm Gem Hawks. I'm coming to you from the United Kingdom. Lovely to be with you as ever. Hopefully we will have some fun together today. I'm working with the Colour Alloy collection in Radiant Rhodonite today, and it's a beautiful collection of beads, including some absolutely fabulous dumortiorite. Now, if this is not a gemstone you've come to before, it's a glorious, rich blue gemstone, and it's been teamed rather intelligently, I'd like to think, with some smashing silver coloured beads and some goldstone, some blue goldstone in this instance, also some crystals and bits and bobs, but we'll have a closer look at that in a second. One of the techniques I'm going to be sharing with you today is looking at slightly heavier gauge wire than you may be used to seeing. So we're going to look at some 16 gauge round wire, which in the United Kingdom is equivalent to around about 1.25 millimetres. So it's quite a hearty, strong wire, but we're going to look at ways to make it work for you alongside our gorgeous Radiant Rhodonite collection. Paula has joined us. Good morning to you, my lovely. How are you today? Where are you joining us from? Are you in the US? Where are you from around the world? It's lovely to have your company. Thank you very much for hopping on in. So if we've never met before, my name is Gem. I live in the United Kingdom. I'm slap bang in the centre of England, actually, in a county called Oxfordshire. So tell me where you are, what you've been up to, and how your day has gone so far. We'll have a bit of a chat. What we normally do is just hang out for sort of 8-10 minutes or so, just saying hello to everyone and just sort of gathering our thoughts a little bit and having a bit of a chit-chat while everybody joins us. Paula has come in from Chicago in USA. Is that the Windy City? Am I thinking of the wrong place? I've only been to 2 locations in the United States. I spent some time down in Florida, spent 3 weeks travelling around in a little rental car, and I also very, very briefly hopped on a plane and off a plane in New York. So I didn't get to see the fair city, unfortunately, but one day I am coming back. Dina is in from California. Hello and good morning to you. It's a little bit early, I guess. Angie's in from Kentucky. And Paula says, yes, it is. Oh, are you Paula? Now, I have a friend from Galicia, which is in Spain, and she's very much a Paula. But I guess in the UK, we all call her Paula. Well, I don't. I call her Paula, but that's, doesn't really matter, does it? It's as long as she's happy, she's happy. Debbie says, hi, watching from Michigan. Have some friends from England. Getting snow today. Oh my goodness. Hi, Anne is in from California also. Hello, my lovely. How are you today? I hope you're all having a wonderful, dreamy, fabulous kind of morning, because here on Jessie James Beads on Facebook today, what we're going to be doing is having a look at really a very lovely collection. And just while we're waiting for a few more people to pop on, what I'm going to do is pop you down to the screen and give you a closer look at some of those beads. They are gorgeous. Now, I haven't used every single bead in the box, as it were. It's actually in a bag on this occasion. Here are some of the other beads. I'm not going to pop them on the board, I'll put them on my hand. So you've got these absolutely fabulous hexagon crystals, as well as lots of these little silver spacers. You've got a blue tiger's eye, which is gorgeous. You've also got some blue goldstone. Now, I don't know if you are familiar with goldstone. It was originally made in Italy, where it was called Avventura, which means by chance. And it was, so the legend goes that in a glass maker, I don't know if you know, but there are certain places in Italy which are very famous for their fabulous glass. And an apprentice was walking between the vats of molten glass and accidentally kicked in some copper filings. And this is where we get goldstone from. It's a really beautiful, sparkling, created gem. Absolutely gorgeous. So how have you all been today? Are you all keeping well? I understand some of you are getting snow. Michigan's getting snow today. It's just a little bit wintry, but not too awful today in Oxfordshire. So that's a little bit of a closer look at the gemstones. Now, the collection's called Radiant Rhodonite, but I really like those puffy spacer beads. I'm going to show you them again, actually, just on the overhead for a tick. These, if I just open up the expanding bangle that I've made, Just taking a closer look. Now, this is one of the goldstone beads, and hopefully you'll be able to see the sparkle that you see in this. Isn't that glorious? It's one of the first times that a genuine gemstone was named after a man-made material. So aventurine, which is a natural gem, was discovered after the time that aventura, which is the original name for goldstone, that was discovered first, or it was created first. So aventurine was named after this, which I think is really cool. You might think it's dreadfully boring, in which case I'm terribly sorry. Elvia is in from Arizona. Hello to you, my lovely. I guess you're not getting snow today. These spacers are absolutely fantastic. I love them. They're like great big gorgeous sexy wheels. And then you've got the puffy, almost like a balloon, which is filigree. Lots and lots to love. So our key techniques today are going to be making, in honour of Sarah's beautiful puppy Axel, we're going to be making puppy paw prints, and I'll also show you how to quickly put together your own expanding bangle. Now, the wires that I'm going to be using today are quite a range. Now, I've added all of the links on to the video today, so you should be able to see what you need to get if you wish to recreate this piece. So the bangle itself and the main paw print are made with 16 gauge round wire. So I'll be working in a silver coloured wire in just a moment, but I've actually recreated in copper just because that's basically what I had in my hands at the time. May has arrived. Hello darling, how are you today? I hope you are well. So in a couple of minutes we'll look at creating our puppy paw prints, and I'll show you some other cool ways that you can use the puppy paw prints, and if we have time towards the end of the hour, might even be able to show you how to make a little ring as well, which is pretty cool. If you like animals as much as I do, it could be a bear paw print, not a prawn print. I don't know what prawn's feet look like. I imagine probably not very much like this. I've also put together, using one of the round beads, a little earring as well. So once we get the main technique nailed, and we're going to do this, as I say, in quite a heavy wire, and I want to show you two different ways of working with that heavy wire alongside our Radiant Rhodonite collection from the Colour Alloy suite. So I'll just pop that one back out of the way for now, and hopefully you'll be able to see the silver on the blue backgrounds today. Any issues, let me know, because I've got my paper underneath the blue. So if you think you'd rather see it on something like this, let me know, but there is a bit of a glare on it. We've run out of natural sunlight for the day, so this is what we're going to be working with. Now, this is around about 10 inches of your 16 gauge wire, and we'll just get to that in just a tickety-boo. Thank you for the invite to your tutorial, says Anne. Thank you very much for accepting it and popping along with us. So let's just look back up at my silly face for a second. Now I will show you how to create your own expanding bangle using that beautiful heavy gauge wire as well. And as I said, I'm going to show you a couple of different ways that you can make wire your friend rather than your enemy. At least it can become your frenemy. You can get used to using it. So let's pop back down to the board and we'll get kicking off with our tutorial. So the main feature of today's tutorial is the Axel puppy footprint. Or the puppy paw print, I suppose, is actually more accurate. But let's leave those beautiful bees from the collection in the corner. So can you all see the wire okay on that blue background? For the paw print itself, what I want to do is have a nice soft fluidity to my wire. I want that to be nice and fluid. So what I'm going to do is use my bent chain nose pliers. Now it doesn't matter what colour the handles are, these are my everyday go-to pliers. If I could only have two tools, it would be my bent chain nose and my flush cutters. They are absolutely essential for working with wire. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab a hold of one end, and you'll see a little bit later on why I like the bent chain nose. Chain nose pliers are perfectly adequate for the most part, but you'll see that the bent chain nose are so cool for getting right in and amongst the gubbins when you're working with wire. So as I said, I want this to be nice and soft and smooth and fluid. So I'm going to really press some heat into the wire. Again, 16 gauge gauge, which is approximately equivalent to 1.25mm. That's how we would refer to it in the UK. And this is around about 10 inches. Now I'm really concentrating, not only am I straightening the wire, but I'm putting a lot of heat into that. Now the wire is super fluid and ready to get going. What we're going to do is start by making a series of 4 small bubble shapes. And all I do for this is I roll the pliers around on the wire. So I'm going to start close to the very end of my wire, and I'm just going to roll that around like so. Getting a hold of a grip of the end of it and just rolling those pliers around to create my first little bubble shape on the end. Once I've got that first bubble shape, Gracie is in from sunny Southern California. I bet it's beautiful there today. Once I've got my first little bubble shape into position, I'm just going to flatten the whole thing down. Give that a bit of a gentle squeeze just to set that shape. Before I continue on in the same direction, again, I'm making sure that that wire is nice and warm, just using the heat of my body rather than playing a flame over it. The next toe, or the next, I don't know, do dogs have toes or do they have something else? Is it called something else? I'm not 100% sure. So you can see that I've gripped the wire either side with my round nose pliers. I'm just going to roll them gently. Now, what I did there was start on the one side and turn it around, withdraw the pliers, invert them like so, pop them back in so I can continue in the same direction. And then I'm just opening and closing gently all the way around so that I get that second bubble shape into position. Now, one of the reasons that I adore my bent chain nose pliers is that if I pop those up underneath, I'm just going to straighten up that bottom line so that the 2 sections of wire really nestle up super neatly side by side. And because they're bent chain nose, you can just pop them up inside. If I was using standard chain nose, I'd have to elevate them so close that it would be all blurry. You wouldn't be able to see what's going on. So hopefully it's a little bit clearer for you when I'm using these to demonstrate with. Now you can see that the wire has come away from that second toe, or that second bubble shape, and it's elevated slightly. Well, I actually want that line to continue down in this direction. So if I grip hold of those 2 sections of wire and firmly draw the tail of wire down, we're going to make a little bit of a curvature in this piece as we go, like so. If you need to, you can just trim the end away or just give that a firm squeeze to get it to sit where you want it to. So I'm going to make another 2 toes on the puppy paw print, like so. So I've popped the wire in between the 2 sides of those round nose pliers. I'm going to start by moving that around. Now, if it's easier for you, you can gently use your fingers rather than the pliers. You've got to find which is the most comfortable way for you to work. So I pop the pliers underneath and just draw that tail around, open and closing the pliers as I go. So I've created a third little toe shape, a little bubble shape. Now, those are starting to stagger slightly, so I want to keep them lined up neatly. Oh, I'm glad you're enjoying that information, Gracie. Thank you for coming in and joining us. So very, very gently, I'm just lining those 2 little bubble shapes up. I'm not pressing very hard. I'm just getting them to sit in a neat little row. So the wire will start to get tense, and what will happen is you're doing something to the wire here, but it gets work hardened just a little bit further along. So you may need to just add a little bit more heat into the wire as you go. Got a fly flying up my nose, so sorry about that momentary pause. So we're going to go for 4 toes on our puppy paw print today. Pop those round nose pliers back in and roll them around. So I'm going to withdraw the pliers. I've got my first half of that shape, and then I'm going to switch them over to make sure that it's easy for me to continue just opening and closing those pliers and drawing that all the way around. So you can see that we've got our 4 little bubbles now. So what I'd like to do is to have those following a more circular form. I'm just going to very, very carefully give that a little bit of a squeeze and just very carefully move that around little by little, getting those 2 wires to sit side by side before drawing the wire down. Now that's lifting forward slightly, so I'm just going to get that super warm first, Get those 2 bubbles very, very carefully. I'm very gently just opening and closing my bent chain nose pliers, just to make sure that I can get them to sit side by side. I'm not crushing in any way, shape or form. So again, that's just flipped over in my hand, but that's fine. I'm just going to add some heat and warmth into the design now. What I want to do is to create a round form that's going to fit the dumortierite bead so that that sits inside the centre of our puppy paw print. So you can see at the moment that we don't have enough of an arc going on. So you'll need to refer to the bead that you're using, and these are absolutely gorgeous. I love dumortierite anyway. It's not a well-known bead. It's not a well-known gemstone rather. But it is a glorious, glorious colour. If you love lapis lazuli, if you like sodalite, if you like those classical blue gemstones, this is definitely one to investigate further. So what I want to do is to get these bubbles to sit in a more rounded form. Hello, Margaret in Edinburgh, my darling, how are you? I hope that you're doing okay and it's not too chilly. So I'm going to very, very carefully, small movement by small movement, just get that arc a little bit more circular. Again, applying heat where I've added some work hardening because it stiffens the wire up as you go. Pop that bead back in and you can see now that that fits quite neatly into position. So what I will do is I'll add some warmth to the tail of the wire that's coming away from those bubbles or those little toes that we've made. So what I don't like about bead mats, they move. But hopefully you can see the wire nicely on this one. I'm going to get some lovely heat into that. And because I've heated it, my wire will form an arc all by itself. If you're rude to your wire, it will be all jagged and rough. If you struggle to get the wire to do this, you can pop your gemstone into position, pinch very, very firmly with your non-dominant hand, switching around as you need to. What we're going to do is chase the circular form around the dumortierite bead. It doesn't need to be exactly the same size, but you can see it gives you a lovely round form. Now, if you struggle with this, you could use a pen of a similar size to get the basic form and then just open it or close it as you need. So I'm just going to draw the tail of the wire around just a little bit further before I pop that bead back in. Now, I'm really happy with that shape and size. I hope that you're enjoying the tutorial so far. So what I'm going to do is chase the tail of wire for a second time around the dumortierite disc bead, all the way across the top, all the way, moving that small amount by small amount until it comes back up to the toe where we started. So if I flip this on its side, you can see that there are 2 passes of wire that have circled around the girdle or the edge of that bead. If I pop that back in, you can see that we're keeping that bead nice and safe. We'll be setting it in a moment with some finer gauge wire, but at the moment we're working with that lovely heavy 16 gauge round wire. Now is the time to use my flush cutters. What I want to do is trim the second pass of wire. So we've gone all the way around the dumortierite once, all the way for a second time, and we're going to cut it where we started with that very first little bubble shape. So I would offer those flush cutters in, triple check before I press and cut that away. So we've got our lovely little puppy paw print design. This tail of wire we're going to use to create a link to hang on our bangle a little bit later. So we will come back to that adjustable bangle in a little while, but for now we're going to continue with our puppy paw print or our axle paw print. So this will become a hanger, so we're not going to throw that away, we're just going to pop it up at the top, out of the way for a hot minute. So I'm really happy with how all of those toes have lined up. If you find that they're all going off at different angles, you can just get in there, very, very gently, just line them up and give the outside edges just a little bit of a squash, not where it's crossing over, never where 2 wires cross over, just the outside of that half circle. Give that a bit of a squeeze and you'll set that shape for good and proper. So that's how we create the overall shape and form. This is the design I first used about 4 or 5 years ago. I think I've still got the photographs of it somewhere. So I'm going to push the dumortierite out for the moment, and we're going to add in now some finer gauge wire. Now you may prefer to use a 24, I'm going to use a 26. I wouldn't probably go any lighter than a 26 gauge, and I'm just going to trim away a very small section of that round 26 gauge wire. I'm going again for silver colour as was requested, and I've linked all of your product for you today in the video description. So what we're going to do now is find a way to securely set our dumortierite in the centre of that puppy paw print design. So if you want to make your life easier, what we can do is slide that wire in between those two lines. Whoops, it slid all the way back out again. So we've slid the wire up the centre there. What we need to do is make sure that we're going to wrap where it won't come undone. So if you look at the two wires just here, if I put my finger inside, you'll be able to see. One comes to an end and one joins the rest of the project. We want to wrap the finer gauge wire around the one that joins the rest of the project just next to that toe. So you could slide that between the two. If I flip it over, this is the side that joins the rest of the project. So I want to wrap that around a good 3 or 4 times. Let's just slide that in the correct section. So if I take the end and just post that between those two passes of wire, hopefully you can see that all right. And I'll just pull that tail through with the pliers. Now the reason we've gone for the one that joins the rest of the project is if we wrap onto this one, it will simply slide off the end, and that would be rubbish because the whole thing would fall apart. So I'm going to go for 4 wraps just to make sure that this is nice and safe. If you struggle with the other bit being between the wires, just yoink that out for a moment, and we're just going to move that around to make our life as easy as possible. So I'm going to wrap 4 times around the section that continues onto the project. So post that little end through between them. So going through between those two lines. Posty posty. Grab the end with my pliers. And you can see that starting to wrap. Now it's moved around. I've got a friendly fly who just wants to join in today. It doesn't really matter at the moment if it moves around. Don't worry, okay? So I'm going to take that through all the way again. And we're just wrapping 4 times around the one side of that heavier gauge wire that meets all the way around there. So what I want to do is to make sure when I cut that off, the cut sits inside the frame against the gemstone rather than where it might catch on something that you're wearing or indeed your skin. So if I scooch that into position, so if I just open the design up a bit, you can see it's sitting just underneath that first toe. What we're going to do now is add in our dumortierite bead. Pop that onto the bead hole. You could very easily get a heavier gauge. You could get 24 gauge in there if you wanted to. And we're just going to sit that inside that framework of the puppy paw that we made. So if I flip the design over, we're going to find somewhere secure to attach on the other side. Now you can sit this really wherever you fancy. So if you want that to go from top to bottom, we can go from top to bottom. What you need to do is make sure when you're adding on to the far side that you're not adding on to a place where it will easily come away. So what I might do is thread that through like so, pull that up into position, flip it over, and if you look at the two, if I flip the design over in my hands now, this is the side we're going to wire to because this is seamless. You can't get lost off this side of the wire. If I flip the design over on this side, you got an end to contend with, and we don't want that end to get involved. So I just need to tighten that up neatly, flip the design over, and make sure that I'm wrapping around the side that isn't going to get lost. So I'm just going to post through wherever it's easy. Gracie says, I love your detailed walkthrough. I just need to press a button so I can actually see on the tricky parts. Thank you so much, Gracie. I appreciate that. It's not always the easiest thing in the world to show you quickly on camera. For one thing, the camera is this far away from my hands, so quite often I will bump the camera with my pliers or my head. So I appreciate the fact that this is helpful. I know that sometimes I have been accused in the past of going on a bit. So I'm going to wrap 4 times on both sides of that dumortierite bead. So that's 1, that's 2. Anne says, FB is having a live signal problem on my computer. Oh my goodness, I'm so sorry to hear that. Hopefully it will catch up for you, or failing that, you can catch up later on replay. Is anybody else experiencing any tricky details, any issues, any problems? What I'm going to do is just continue for the time being. and try to ensure that the tutorial is completed. So whether it comes out live or if you have to catch up on catch up, or replay as I believe it's known, then hopefully you will still be able to see. So I'm going to bring that over for the last time so you can see we've got 4 wraps on this side. I'm going to very, very carefully make sure that I'm cutting only where I want to cut, and give that last little tail a squish and a squeeze so that the end sits inside the frame. Now the cut end is coming over the top, so what I do is I grab that wire and gently rotate the pliers, and this is another reason for getting the bent chain nose pliers. You can really get inside the design and just tighten and tidy, and it will make your work so much more long lasting. So if we flip that design over, it doesn't matter which way you look at it, you've got a really cool little puppy paw print. And we made sure that the winding on of the finer gauge wire that holds that dumortierite in position, we made sure that that was on the sections of wire that will keep it nice and safe and secure. So what I would like to do next, let me just pop up here for a second. I'm still here, I haven't got stunt hands in to do it for me, it's still me, I'm sorry about that. What we're going to do now is show you how to create a nice little linking loop. Now this doesn't have a bead on it, you could add a bead on if you had a large enough drill hole, just to extend that as a little dropper or a charm. You can make it even massiver if you've got nice big disc beads with a drill hole through the middle. Massiver is probably not very good English, so we'll just pretend I didn't say that. That's the joy of life. Actually, you can't get away with pretending I didn't say it, because I absolutely did. Never mind, eh? So if we pop back down to the overhead, I will show you how to make that little link section. So I've made one ahead of time in copper. So let's see if we can replicate something a little bit similar in the silver. Now you don't have to use the heavy gauge wire if you don't want to. This section has certainly seen a little bit of action because it was an offcut from our puppy paw print. You could use an 18 gauge, which is equivalent to 1mm if you wanted to, and that would certainly be adequate because it's a double wrapped loop. So there are no open and closables, so it's certainly strong enough if you want to downsize it to make your life easier. I'm going to be thrifty and just use this offcut. So this is probably about 3.5 to 4 inches in length. What I'm going to do is come 1 inch from the end and pop a right angle bend on like so. I'm going to pop in with my round nose pliers, roll those round nose pliers halfway so that I get that first shepherd's crook almost looking design. Pop those pliers back in and draw that tail over the top like so. You can just rotate that around to make sure that that's a nice smooth shape. So what I'm going to do is show you the tricky end of the loop first. I'm just going to make sure that I'm happy with the shape and then open it out slightly. Can you see there's a tiny bit of a gap there? We're going to decide which end of the puppy paw print we're going to hang from. Now, the end where we started is the least secure of the two. So what we're going to do is pop over onto the last of the little toes that we made, slide that through the toe into the loop shape that we've created, and we're just going to close that up. Let's have a look. Have you guys checked out these mixes Gem is using, packed with Dakota stones and accenting JJB components? They are gorgeous. Very, very happy with my stuff that comes through. So you can see I've suspended the paw print on the end of that little open so far loop that we've created. So we're going to close that up now. What I'm going to do is very, very gently use my pliers to just draw that gap shut. And then I'm going to support the loop. Now what I'm doing here is using minimal pressure, and I'm touching that loop on either side. I'm not crushing it, and I'm not putting any pressure where the wires cross over or where the toe is captured by the bottom half of that loop. So what I'm going to do is push that tail over to begin with, and I'll show you small movements by small movements. And I'm just going to wrap that around by hand to begin with. This is a very strong wire that we're working with, so what you might need to do is just tighten that up slightly. And the easiest way to do that is to get the pliers in like so, Give that a bit of a squeeze just to tighten it up. Now there is a 2-plier way of closing up your wrapped loop, so that's what we're going to apply. You could easily use 2 bent chain nose pliers. They work really beautifully for this. And again, I'm supporting that loop over the single passes of wire and I'm not putting too much pressure on it. What I'm going to do is use my bent chain nose pliers to simply close up that loop into a nice, neat, wrapped loop. So just squishing and squishing all the way around. Controlled small movements will give you a nice finish, whereas if you rush it, it might get all a bit squishy. So if I pop that down onto the board for a second, you can see that we've got the first half of our charm being created. I'm thinking of it as a charm because I've popped it on a bangle or a bracelet. So you could, if you wanted to, add a bead at this juncture. And what I'm going to do is make sure that that upright section is nice and straight before we move on. Let me see actually if one of the beads from the mix will fit on the wire. I have a suspicion that these very, very cool silver coloured beads will go on. Yes, it will. So if you want to add a bead, it's a nice way to extend the drop. It depends how close you want to wear it to the wrist. Or, you know, if you're going to have that on earrings, you might want them to be a slightly longer drop. This is a slightly simplified drop earring. So that's just got one of those gorgeous blue gold stones suspended. The technique is exactly the same way that we just set the dumortiorite. However, with the small round bead, I think it's an 8mm blue gold stone, I've used a heavier gauge wire. I used 20 gauge, which is equivalent to 0.8mm. And all I've done, instead of wrapping and wrapping and wrapping, I've put an open loop on either side. I will show you a quick run through on that piece later. But if you wanted to have a slightly more glamorous drop, a longer drop earring, you could certainly add in a bead. And these beads come in the Radiant Rhodonite mix. So what I want to do now is create a loop that's wrapped at the top, so that we can add that onto our bangle later. So again, I'm going to be using my bent chain nose pliers. If I want the dangle of the charm to sit in this direction, what I need to do is make sure that when I create the loop, it comes up towards me. If I wanted the dangle to sit like so for instance, if I was setting 20 or 30 of these on a bangle, I would want them to sit in this orientation. You would need to decide how you want that to sit. But what we're going to do is have a loop coming up towards us. So I'm going to check the loop at the bottom, pop my pliers in over the top and push that hefty gauge wire forwards. So if I flip this sideways, you can see that the 2 loops are going to be in the same alignment. Pop back in with those round nose pliers. Now we have a message here from Danielle saying Facebook has been a little bit funny. We will have the replay available on YouTube and the blog in case you miss anything. That sounds a lot like Facebook. That does sound a lot like Facebook. It does seem to be quite tricky with our lives at the moment. So working in the same orientation as the lower loop, we're going to pop those round nose pliers in, roll them around to get the first half of that shepherd's crook shape. Pop them back in again and draw the tail all the way around and over the top. Now if the loop is too small or too large, you have an opportunity to make it slightly different. So I've just closed that up slightly. If you wanted to make it larger, you could just open that out slightly. So problem solving on the go. I'm going to give that a gentle squeeze again, just over the rounded section, not where the wires cross over. Grip a hold of the looped section and then take that tail all the way around. Now it is slightly firmer to work with when you're using the 16 gauge rather than the 18 gauge, but the process is the same. We're going to close this loop up because we're going to treat it like a bead later when we create that expanding bangle. So if I flip the design over, you can draw that tail around by hand as much as you're physically able to. When it starts to get too tough, you can bring those pliers into position, and it is, again, small movements will kind of win the day in terms of neat and tidy finish. So if I draw that over the top, flip that over the end, I think we filled as much as we need to fill. Just going to support that section of wire we're about to trim away, look twice, cut once, and then there's much less crying. And I'm just going to tidy these loops up. I have myself in the past, and you know, not just when I first began, I have cut the wrong wire a couple of times and it is heartbreaking because you've got to start again. And you know, I'd rather be patting my dogs than doing the same thing 500 times. So there we go. We've got an extended drop now on this one. If you don't want the extended drop, you can just close those 2 wraps of wire together. This is made all using the 16 gauge in silver colour round. This one is using 16 gauge and 18 gauge in raw copper round. So that's what the 2 different kind of feels look like. What we're going to do now is have a look at setting an earring. So we've got a smaller bead, which is a round goldstone bead. Now they do have magnificent drill holes, so we're going to use one of these to create a paired earring like so. So if I pop this up and out of the way for a moment, can you still see that? Yes, you can. So what we're going to do is grab a section of a slightly lighter gauge wire even now for the earrings, although that looks quite hefty. That might be 18 gauge as well. Let's have a go with the 18 gauge and see how it looks side by side. It's possible that I made it in 16 gauge. So for the ear wire, you don't really need a huge amount of wire because we're not going to be creating such a large aperture. This is the 18 gauge round silver colour wire that we're working with now. So we're going to basically create the same form to begin with. So I'm going to start off, and I'm going to go slightly faster through this one because at the beginning of the show we've already seen how to create the basic form. So loop number 1, loop number 2. What I'm going to do is make sure that I'm not creating them too large. Get those side by side. If you decide that they're too far apart, again, problem solving on the go, what you can do is just roll them back slightly. So just push down like so, and you can shorten the distance between the 2 loops. What you then need to do, put those pliers back in and draw the tail of wire down so that you can continue on making the next subsequent 2 little loops or 2 little toes. So I don't know if you're all actually still with me, if you're seeing anything, but I'm going to blaze on and hopefully we can pop this up on YouTube later or stick it on replay and hopefully things will smooth out a little bit if it's not being too temperamental. So I've made my 4 toes, again in exactly the same way as we did the first section, and I'm just going to get them to nestle side by side as neatly as I possibly can. What we're going to do is, let me just get that last toe nice and neat. Draw those around to make it slightly smaller. Offer it up to your bead so you can see that that's going to sit over the top of the bead quite neatly. Pop some warmth and heat into that wire and start swooping that around. It's a little bit trickier to use the bead as a guide because it's a round bead. So again, you could use your any pliers that are round. You could go down to the base of your round nose pliers, or you could use your multi-step bail makers. I'm just going to use my thumb to grip that. Draw the wire around gently and then offer it up to see if that fits size-wise. That looks pretty good to me. So what we're going to do is grip a hold of that wire and make a second pass all the way around, making sure that my bead will sit inside the design. I've made that slightly too small. Now, what has Anne got to say here? You keep popping in and out. Well, I promise you it's not me. I'm staying here. Naughty Facebook. Okay, so I'm going to just draw the wire all the way around for a second pass, exactly as we did in the first demonstration. You can support those 2 lines of wire side by side like so, before bringing that all the way back up to the top. I'm just going to try and get those to sit one on top of the other before trimming away with those flush cutters. Again, making sure that you're just trimming the excess away and you're not cutting the wrong bit, because that does get quite sad when it happens. So what we need to do is make sure that there's no sticky uppy bits. Now this first toe section is sticking up a little bit and it catches on my hand. So what I've done is I've opened that design up ever so slightly and I'm going to trim away barely a hair's breadth of wire. Now please make sure that those go in the scrap pot because they can be very uncomfortable if they get stood upon. So I'm just going to close that first little toe shape up, gentle squeeze, just to make sure that that's nice and firm. And again, I'm just going to nip the outside edges of those little toe shapes to make sure that they're nice and solid. Make sure that my goldstone bead sits inside. And then what we're going to do is use some 20 gauge, which I have just here. Very, very short amount, and I would harvest the scrap pot for this. It's just over an inch that I'm using, and I'm only using just over an inch because it's easier to show you. So I pop the goldstone, it's a blue goldstone, onto that wire, and again it's just over an inch in length. Pop that into the design, and what we're going to do is just fold those ends over. So you can really use very, very small amounts of scrap wire, and I'm just going to turn the end up a little bit like an L shape before popping that over the top of the wire and just drawing it around and snuggling it away neatly. I'll show you it's just hooked on like so, and then flip the design around. Whoop, that's got a mind of its own today. So you can see that's going to sit quite neatly. Now for the earrings, what you can do is capture that little toe at the top there. So if I draw, whoops, it's come off the end because I didn't close it up properly. That's actually not a bad thing. I'm just going to put some strength into this loop. What we're going to do is just offer it over the top of the design, like so. We're going to trim away to, gosh, not a very large amount at all. Pop that out of the way. Take it away from the design a second. And we're going to two little bends, so it looks a little bit like a staple now, which isn't a very attractive way of thinking of it, but that is what it looks like. So I'm going to take this straight section and post it through the first toe, where we first started. Pop that through, sit the design into position, and the tail comes through the end of that first toe. And as we bring that last little section of wire over, I'm just going to grip that down onto the main section of the paw print, like so. And then do exactly the same on the other side, so that sits neatly away. There's probably just slightly too much wire there. You see how we need very little amount of that 20 gauge wire at all. That almost pinged into infinity, or on the floor. Take the tail and squish that over the back of the design, like so. So that's looped in really safely and securely, and the ends are tucked inside against the gemstone. Kelly has joined us. Super excited for this tutorial. That's very kind of you, Kelly. Now, Facebook's being a bit wicked and it's popping in and out, so if you struggle to see the feed today, it should be going up on YouTube a little bit later. But you can see that that's nice and secure now. Pop that over to the side. And then you can just add that directly onto an ear wire. So here's a handmade ear wire. This is in 0.8 or 20 gauge wire. If I pop that into position and just close the loop up, we have an odd pair now. An odd pair of earrings. Multi-tonal. But you can see how the same basic design that we used for the puppy paw print can be made into those earrings. And also, you can make that into a ring as well. So I'll show you how to make the basic ring shape. What would you prefer to see? Would you like to see the expanding bracelet or the ring? What would you prefer to see? Or what would you like to see first, and then we'll see what we've got time for. So we've got a ring to work with, or we have got the basis of the expanding bangle, which uses that slightly heavier gauge wire. So presumably, because Facebook's being a bit naughty, I'm not going to be able to see any comments anyway, because that sounds about right. So I have one comment showing, which is from Anne. So we'll show you how to make the ring. Now the basis of this ring is going to be one of my new tutorials actually. It's a really simple design. If you've never made a ring with wire, it's absolutely fabulous. So easy. So do I have my mandrel? I do. That's a win. I was a bit worried for a moment that I didn't then. So we're going to make the ring first, and if we have time, we'll catch up with the expanding bangle design. So let's just pop that back up out of the way for the moment. And what we're going to do is work in some of our 16 gauge wire. We don't need a huge amount of the 16 gauge to form the basis of the ring. It depends obviously on the ring size. Just get that wire out of the way for a second. To begin with, I want to get a little bit of warmth and fluidity into that design, so smooth that down before we get a nice ring shape. Now I'm just using a very standard ring mandrel. You could use any round form that replicates the size that you're looking for. And having warmed that 16 gauge wire, I forgot what it was for a hot minute then. Having warmed the 16 gauge wire, we're just going to form that around the size that we would like to work with. What's Anne got to say? You are talking, but your mouth movement does not go together with what you're saying. Wonderful, that sounds about right. Maybe I just won't have my face on the screen then. We'll just stick with hand cam for now. So the ring size is set at this stage. So we're going to make it approximately a size Q, which I think is about a size 8. I think that's about a size 8. So we've got our ring shape as a bit of a pear drop to begin with. And what we're going to do is take a look up at the top here. We're going to think about how far apart the space will need to be for that bead to sit in position. So if you pop the bead in, you'll be able to see how far apart you need to make the next upright bend. So actually what I'm going to do is send one in one direction, like so. So that's come away at 90 degrees. Flip that over, pop the dumortiorite disc bead back into position. Hold that ring form and push in the opposite direction. So hopefully you can see what we've got going on here. What we need to do now is turn each one of these into a small loop. So if I pop the dumortiorite out of the way, we're going to pop back in now with those round nose pliers. Now you don't need a huge amount of wire to achieve this. So what we can do is trim away to around about, if you say ½ an inch, that's more than you need. But in trimming to ½ an inch, you make your life slightly easier. You'll probably need to trim a little bit more off as well. So if I roll those ends around, we're just making 2 opposite loops. So there's our first loop that we've created on one half of the ring. Hopefully this is a good angle to show you what's occurring. And then exactly the same on the other side. Roll that shape around. Using those round nose pliers, you can do multiple small movements if you want to. And then we just need to make sure that those are sitting upright and equal and opposite. So that just needs a little bit of straightening up. Whoops-a-daisy. This is why I don't like bead mats. And there we go. So you can see we've made a basic ring shape. It looks a little bit like a stirrup. A little bit like a stirrup. So these need to be upright and coming away. If I pop that on the finger, you'll be able to see what we're looking to work with. Should probably put that on the mandrel. So this is a good opportunity to check your size as well. We need to make sure that that bead is going to sit in between those 2 loops we've created. Pop that bead back out, withdraw the mandrel. It's a good solid wire, but if you wanted to at this stage, I can't find my mini block, what you can do is just add a little bit of very gentle hardening, very, very gentle, so we're not marking it, but it just means that when you're working, you're less likely to cause it to go squishy. So the next thing we need to do is to set that bead. So we're just going to set the bead using a short length of 20 gauge wire, which I had a hot second ago, but it went walkabout. So we don't need a vast amount here. It's around about, I'm going to go with 12 inches. Because that gives me an opportunity to stop the disc bead from spinning as well. So if I pop the wire through, and this again is 20 gauge, 0.8mm, I'm going to slide that in through one side of those loops, add the bead into position, and then you withdraw that 0.8 or 20 gauge all the way back down until you can slide that up through the opposite loop. So it's currently suspended, like so. Hello Gabriella and welcome. So what we want to do is to make sure that this is going to be nice and securely set. So this was around about 8 to 10 inches of that 20 gauge. What I'm going to do is centralise the wire, like so. And I'm going to take the tail, I'm going to wrap it around each side. So it can be a bit spinny because the disc bead is going to want to spin. And what we're going to do is give that a hearty warm. Take the tail, post it through the centre of the ring shank, all the way through. I'm going to help that get a nice firm bend like so. Draw the wire through and take that all the way around. Now for security's sake, I'm going to take that through a second time. So down through the centre of the ring shank, all the way around like so, until you've got two little coils on the one side. Now you obviously would spend a little bit more time than I am right now. I'm trying to teach a technique. You can take a little bit longer and make that super neat and tidy. If I flip the design over, we would then need to do the exact same thing on the other side. So I'm going to make sure that that pulls nice and tight. And then what I'm going to do on this side, get that nice and warm. You can either come up so that it's equal and opposite. So if you want it to look on the diagonal from above, it's a very, very small attention to detail. What you can do is pull that nice and tight, warm the tail of wire and draw that up and through. And then they're on the same side. It's entirely up to you. So just going to pull that through once and then for a second time. Like so. Now in and of itself, you can very simply cut the wire away, trim those two wire ends, straighten up those loops, and you've got a perfectly wearable, almost instant make ring. It's a really cool design if you've just got single beads to use up. Really cool design to work with. However, if you want to stop these from spinning, what we're going to do is take a stripe of wire underneath the disc bead like so. And then on the other side, underneath the disc bead on the other side. You just need to make sure that that still fits. That still fits for a cue with those passes of wire going underneath the disc, and it stops the disc from spinning. Let me get my hand out of the way and then just finish off with a wrap on top of that first wrap that we created. So I'm just going to, this is the underside of the ring, going to pull those nice and firmly into position and then take the tail all the way around the outside and just wrap around the shank of the ring. So I'm going to do that once, twice on this side. You again can take a little bit extra time to make that super neat and tidy, rather than me just trying to show you the technique at light speed so we get more in our hour. Pull that over the top, flip the design over. So you can see what we need to do now. We've got those two passes of wire, and this is to stop the disc bead from spinning. Take that wire all the way around, give it another quick smooth and warm, push the tail through the centre of the ring shank. So that's one wrap and a second wrap for security. Please do take more time than this and make it neat and tidy. Give that a squeeze. And then you have the opportunity to pop some coils up on either side if you wish to. So when I'm making coils that need to be approximately the same size, I will always cut and then measure and cut so that they're the same length. And in that way, you'll have coils that look approximately similar. So I'm just going to do the one on the one side. Pop in with that round nose plier tip and rotate around until you get the start of a nice coil going. Give that a good squeeze and then rotate, 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 and then press that into the design. So you've got a 2-for-1 really that can work with so many beads, and you don't have to add a puppy paw print if you don't want to. Let's give that a rotate as well. I'll do both of them because then I can show you how to add the paw print if you desire to. You don't have to at all. Squash. In fact, I think it's probably going to be of more value to show you the design of the expanding bangle. Basically with this, you can see you've got access points on the one side, on the other side. All you would need to do is just open those out very, very gently. Pop your puppy paw print over the top, either inside on both sides or outside on both sides, whichever fits best. This is just a puppy paw print I made earlier, so I haven't made it to fit. In fact, because we have the ring mandrel, it's just a little bit too large. Hold on, let's open that out slightly. What I'm doing is just expanding the size of the print in the middle, and hopefully that will then fit around the outside. It's just not going to, which is incredibly rude, I think. Let's go back again with that mandrel and just open that up. You see what I'm doing is I'm pushing that paw print along the mandrel to just largen that slightly. With any luck, that will then fit over the top. So that does now fit over the top on both sides, and all you need to do is wire on with a short amount of that 26 gauge, just around the outside frame and then through the loop, and then continue on the other side. What I want to do is show you in a brief form how to make the expanding bangle, because I think it's a really cool technique to work with if you're going to invest in the 16 gauge wire rather. It's a really cool technique to work with. Now, when we made our first puppy paw print, what we wanted to do was to make the wire nice and soft and fluid so that we can get these lovely smooth circular forms. When we're creating the bangle, we actually want that to be nice and hard. Now, this is a very cool tool indeed. I popped a link in for you. There are two ways that you can use this tool to straighten and harden your wire. Now, there's the normal way to use this tool, which is to pop the wire in the design like so, close that up, and what I like to do is pinch those two top rollers together, and then you can grip a hold of the end of your wire and draw the wire through. And what this does is smooths your wire nicely. Now, when I first came across this tool about 6 years ago, none of us had any idea how to use it, so I invented my own way of using it. So what I'm going to do is turn that into a triangle, and I'm going to push the wire through the rollers. Now, I'm sure that the inventor of this is not going to be very happy, but this is how I use it. Once I've got that wire sitting between those rollers, I flick it flat and draw the wire through. Now, not only, that's quite tough because it's a strong wire. Not only does that strengthen and smooth the wire, but it really gives it a great work hardening. I'm just going to trim the end away on both sides. It's a very cool tool. I do use it quite a lot. If you've got wire that's been in a work bag and it's seen better days, it's quite nice to be able to just rescue that a little bit. Now, I have a round beadle-on bangle form, so I'm just going to make a basic shape. This will depend, the length of wire will depend on how large the wrist is that you want to work with. I've just worked with a piece of wire that I had on the board, but generally speaking I'd be looking at using 12 inches and above. And what will happen is that will loop around twice on a form like this. The key for this to work on your wrist is to gently open that out and see what size wrist you need to work to. Another thing to mention is by the time you've added the beads on, so here's one that I prepared earlier, and this is just about 10.5 to 11 inches of wire. I've added on some beads. Now, these come from the RADIANT RHODONITE kit. They're the beautiful silver coloured bead caps and beautiful funky, I don't know how you describe them, I'm sure there's a word for them, but I really like them. They're almost pillowy, they're lovely. So I've got my beads stranded on. Because we're working with a 16 gauge wire here, you will need to make sure that you get beads that will fit on a slightly curved wire. So if you're working with gemstone beads, what can happen? You have a straight line through your circular bead, like so, and if they're very, very large beads, they're not going to want to go on a curved wire. So use large hole beads for this design. Get the beads that you want to wear on the design all lined up on your section. So if you wanted to add on a charm, you would use the drill hole that we've created in form of this loop, pop it in the correct position before you do anything else. The next thing that we're going to need to do is come around about 1 inch from one end. You must have loaded all of your beads, and what we're going to do is flip this upright. You've got 2 wire stripes, and we're going to take the inch or so from one end and pass it over the other wire in a right angle, like so. So you can see that sits over the top. And what we're going to do is try that on the wrist that we're making for, to make sure that we're lining this up for the smallest possible size that will need to pass comfortably over the widest part of the hand. So I'm going to pinch that very, very firmly. Now we've got the other end of the wire. I'm just going to straighten that out so you can see the difference between the two. And what I'm going to do is pop my pliers underneath just here, So I know that this is the size that will fit my hand, and I'm going to push the opposite wire over before trimming to 1 inch, and I will show you again before we go any further what we're looking to achieve. So this is the size, maximum size that we need to fit comfortably on my wrist. You don't want to get it any larger than you absolutely need to. And then we've created almost like a little square in the centre, like so. Almost like a little square. And then you've got 1 inch excess on either side, crossing over. What we need to do now is to take the little tail that we've got on either side and wrap it around the round nose pliers to create a looped shape. So if I pop those pliers in over the top where that little L occurs, I'm going to push the other wire into position and draw the tail around using my round nose pliers as a guide. So you can see that we've got a loop that forms over the top of that length of wire that meets the beads. And I'm going to do the exact same thing on the other side. So round nose pliers are the perfect thing for this. I'm holding where the L shape forms. I'm going to push that tail over the top like so, and as far round as I can go. You need quite a good grip to do that. We're looking to keep this section in the centre straight, because what we want to do is for that to be expanding. So what we're going to do now is to grip very firmly those 2 sections of wire that join in the centre. And we're going to draw that tail all the way up to the top and cross over. Flip the design and finish off on the other side as well. So bring the tail rather over the top, keeping a nice parallel line in the centre here. Draw that over the top so that they're crossing. Everything is equal and opposite. So you can see how that mechanism forms. Once you can see that you haven't drawn that circle too tight, you can make that slightly tighter if you need to. If it gets too tight, the mechanism won't work, and what we're creating is an expanding bangle. So I'm going to trim away the excess so that the cut section is away from the skin. Exactly the same on the other side. That cut section is trimmed neatly, and I'm just going to make sure that that's nice and tidy. And then you have got yourself an expanding bangle. Once it's on, you may need to ask for assistance, but you can basically one-handed close that up a little bit. The reason that the wire works so well like this, if I flip that over you can see what it looks like. You've got a bangle that goes on nice and firm, but then once it's in position, it doesn't come off. That's the idea anyway. To remove, you just need to open those up. So it's a really cool little technique to learn, and it works really, really well in the 16 gauge wire. So if I pop those side by side, I can just close that up a little bit. Get the curvature in the top in what you estimate to be the closed position, and just let that sit for a little while. And then when you come to use it, the mechanism should slide up nice and neatly like so. And there we go. There's the ring. Let me pop the ring on the ring thing. I'm sure that's got a name. Let's pop that up the other way, shall we? That's better. An odd pair of earrings by an odd jewellery creator, I guess. Here we go. Let's get that other one in. And then the other charm, which could also be worn as a pendant, or you could double that up to make earrings. It's entirely up to you. Bring that into view. So that was your Radiant Rhodonite kit from the Colour Alloy collection. Oh, my mouse has gone to sleep. Let's wake it back up. Hello, I'm still here. I don't know if my mouth is moving at the same speed as my hands or the sound that's coming out. Nobody knows because Facebook is being tricky again. Never mind. Hopefully the recording exists and can go up later on the Jessie James blog. And it can also go up on YouTube. So if you're watching on YouTube, hopefully everything is synced together for you and all is well with the world. It's been my pleasure to be with you today with the Radiant Rhodonite kit. Have yourself a lovely rest of your day. I hope it's beautiful for you no matter what it is you're getting up to. And if they have me back, I'll see you next week. Bye for now.